jump. Okay, right. So maybe we should start. I'm gonna add my camera. So good evening, good morning, good afternoon, good night to everyone. This is the Authentication and Authorization for Constraint Environment, ACE working group meeting. The last session of this IETF. I suppose we can start right now. So while you can read the note well, I'm gonna ask if we can have a JavaScript minute taker, especially a minute taker. That would be great. This time you don't have to fill the blue sheets because it's automatically done for you. I'm gonna put in the chat the link to the Codim. Can we have a minute taker? I don't see anyone in the chat. Can anyone take the mic? Does everyone knows how to use the interface? So now that I'm sharing my screen, I can, if you want to speak, you have to press on this audio button. If you want to be in the queue, this is this icon here. And so we're still waiting for some folks to volunteer to take the minutes. Yeah, thank you, Christian. Can we have anyone helping Christian? One or two volunteers? Should I pick one? We don't have anyone to help Christian? Well, it would be good we have someone volunteering. Yeah, I understand. I would like someone other than our AD to do the minute taker. So Mohit, can I ask you?
Sure. I am not aware of the entire process, so I believe I have to take the notes on Etherpad. Or,
okay, yeah, that's exactly what we're trying to do. It's exactly. And so, anyone, please help Christian and Mohit. That's welcome.
But it's not
Thank you.
It's COAP-EAP, right?
Sorry, Carsten?
It's not actually either pad, it's COAP-EAP.
Yeah.
So look at the row of buttons on the top of your screen. If you go to the third button and press that, then you see a place which says click here to open CodeMD. Do not click that, but click the exit the room button that says open a new tab above that, and then you have a tab where you can take notes.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so now we can start the session. So no questions related to the not well. The good news is that we have a new chair, and let me introduce you, Logan. So Logan, do you want to say something to the working group?
I look forward to working with everybody to advance the working group.
Thank you. So we will go through the working group status, and we have a few presentation. Well, most of them you already know, looking at the session material. So let's jump quickly to the working group status. So we have still one draft that is in publication queue. It's basically looking for a reference, so there is nothing you can do. It's going to happen soon because it's a DTLS reference. We have sent a few drafts in the ISG. So that's the OAuth, auth, the framework, the perms, the profiles, and the DTLS authorized. So OS core profiles and DTLS profiles. We have one draft that is in the MQTT one draft, the MQTT TLS profile, that is AD review. The only question I have regarding this draft is that how aligned it is with the updated text to the framework. And I mean, to be clear, it's nothing that needs to be changed. It's just regarding how specific the profile is regarding the specification of the protocol to be used, to be recommended for use between the client NDS and the client NDRS. So I think, well, the text could mention AS, but I'm just waiting for maybe Signum to check that. So we can do that on the, yeah, that's not a problem. Okay, so I'll let you do the update and whatever you think is useful. We have one draft that is in working group last call. It's the AIF draft. So I don't know if Carsten, you want to say a few words on that?
Well, the only thing I need to say is thank you, Christian, for the review that you sent yesterday. So that will be very useful, but I didn't really have time to actually look at it, but I certainly will within the next few days. And the other observation is this is a 6-week working group last call, which is, I think, is my personal record in the IETF. I'm not exactly sure why we need so long to look at this, but on the other hand, it gives ample opportunity for other people than Christian to actually provide a review.
Okay, so you will close the working group last call with the update. And then, this draft is going to be reviewed by Logan, is going to be the shepherd for that draft. So I hope that by the end of the month, that's going to be shipped to Ben. So we have two new drafts that have been adopted. So the I'm going to call them CMPV2 and HEAP draft. So those are going to be presented. And we still have, I'm just mentioning that in my opinion, the working group is now being focused on shipping the GroupCom, those two GroupCom drafts the new adopted draft, and the PubSub profile. So these are, to me, the draft that we should focus on. I'd like to save time, so maybe we're not going to go through the milestones, but I think we're pretty good for now in the milestones. We do have some interim meetings, so because it has been believed that it's helpful to move the work forward. So it's 1 per month, as we discussed during the last interim meeting. One thing two notes I'd like to raise to the working group. The first one is our relations with all the working group. I mean, the OAuth and the GNAP or GNAP. I just want to make sure that we are not evolving on our own, and that we keep as much as possible touch with those working group. So yeah, I would be interested to know, maybe you can do a plus in the chat if you were following or attending those working group. That would be helpful. And the other comment I received is from the RFC editors that told me it would be helpful that people could submit the XML in version 3. So as you can see on the screen, I provided on the Codim various ways to do that. So it's not mandatory and so on, but if you can do that, please keep that in mind. So I don't see any plus in the chat, so I don't know how to interpret that, if that's no one is really following OAuth or NAP, but yeah, that's something. Okay, so okay, that's good. We have at least one, but we should have more. Okay, now let's move to the presentation then. Does anyone wants to say something? So I propose we start with the CMP draft.
Hello. So this is Mohit. So me and my colleague Saurabh, we are working on this draft for using CMP over COAP transport. So so let me just give you some background. So Daniel, can you please move to the next slide? Okay, so basically in the LAMPS working group, there has been some work going on improving the CMP protocol, and there are currently 3 drafts which are under process. And I think one of the main focus there is to use CMP for industrial and IoT devices. And for that, I think for the constrained devices, CMP can be used more efficiently over COAP transport instead of the traditional HTTP or HTTPS transport, which is over TCP, and it takes a lot of memory and CPU. So so the other key feature of CMP is that it is transport protocol agnostic, and it takes care of encryption, decryption, proof of possession, everything inside the CMP messages itself. So we can, I think we can very easily transport CMP messages over COAP, and I think some people are doing that also. And this draft is just setting up guidelines for how to use COAP transport for CMP transactions. And in general, there is a RFC 6712, which is for CMP over HTTP, and this draft follows mostly whatever is done in that RFC. So yeah, next slide, please. Yeah. So these are some of the key features that we have, or key things that we have defined in this draft. So so first one is service discovery. How a IoT device will discover the other entities, CMP entities in the network. So there could be like fixed URLs which they can poll and see if there is any server there. And then we have defined the COAP URI formats, which is basically just use COAP or COAPS colon slash slash instead of HTTP or HTTPS colon slash slash. And then we have this COAP request and response format. So this kind of defines a new content type for CMP data in the COAP messages. And the other thing that we have defined is the block transfer mode to avoid IP fragmentation of the COAP packets that are carrying CMP messages. And then this draft also talks about how we can use DTLS for COAPS. And then one of the other feature is which came up during discussions was if we can use COAP to HTTP or HTTPS proxy, and that can kind of help integrating this new transport with existing infrastructure without much changes. So these are the main things that we are covering in this draft. Yeah. So I would like to have some feedback from the group. So far, I think I have not received. I have only received comments from I think two or three people. So please go through this and see if there is something we can improve, or something that I missed. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I can take any questions now. I think this was just an introduction.
So do we have any comment regarding especially the COAP proxy? Any concerns?
Well, that's why I just raised my hand. So when you use proxies together with DTLS, then the proxy is in a position where it actually can influence the read and influence the data. So the proxy could do in middle person attack. And
Yes.
I haven't read your draft yet. I'm sorry, but are you discussing this?
Yeah, I have so basically I have certain basically I have captured that use case that the proxy that if there is a DTLS proxy in the path, so the MITM certificate of the proxy should be trusted by the end IoT devices or end entities basically. And the other thing that I suggested was that RAs could be or whatever is the closest CMP other entity, basically RAs or CAs, which are like the next stop. They can actually act as a proxy also. So proxy could be one of the components of those services. Uh,
Okay, so the proxy needs to be in the same security domain that the end server, the origin server,
Yes.
is.
So
Okay.
yeah. So there is one more use case of proxy is basically if you are sending everything over UDP, so it's very susceptible to a lot of UDP based DDoS attacks. So somebody can send any random packet from any IP, right? So if let's say RAs are only like this proxy can help mitigate that also. Basically, you can have I don't know, things like rate limiting and ACLs and all those things, and block things that are not known.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other question? I see in the chat. So the text says client should be configured to trust the CES certificate. used by proxy to sign the man in the middle certificate for certificate chain validation. Do we have concern with that, or?
Well, I not only need to trust the certificate. Trusting a certificate means that I believe that the name given in the certificate has the public key. I actually have to trust the device, the component that is doing the proxy. So having a signed certificate from some CA I trust doesn't mean that the proxy itself is trustworthy.
So proxy. So if we are using, so the idea is the proxy should be maybe let's say we have a CMP server running some entity or some RA or CA, right? So they can be somewhere on a public network, and proxy could be at the edge of the network where you have all the IoT devices, for example, in the local network. And before the things go out to the public network or the internet, so this proxy can be there at the gateway, which is managed by the uh, maybe so there are two type of deployments, right? So one type of deployment is this proxy could be managed by the entity who is the CA or RA, right? So in that case, the end entities will be trusting that certificate. The other option is someone can have a proxy sitting at the edge of their network, and everything that is going to RA or CA, it goes through that proxy, and basically at that point, this proxy can convert CO like UDP to or COAP to HTTP, and that certificate that is installed on the proxy could be trusted. Basically, it will be managed by the same admin who is running those devices.
You keep saying that a certificate is trusted. That's kind of the non-interesting part of it. I mean, I trust a lot of certificates, but I don't trust the websites that are behind those certificates. So how do you actually establish that trust?
So this
But maybe I'm showing my ignorance about CMPv2. Maybe CMPv2 doesn't need any of that, but then you don't need DTLS either.
So I guess to jump in just real quick, Karsten, you know that there's a dedicated extended key usage value for the CMC RA that can go in the certificate. So like if you trust the CA at all, like the root CA, the trust anchor, then you trust them to only sign that EKU when it's held by an entity that you should trust to perform that role. So that helps some. I don't know if it fully helps.
Yeah, but I think the other point that you said is also correct, that CMP doesn't need to depend upon the external like the DTLS to protect the integrity or the privacy. Basically, it can use its own mechanism to establish the trust. So this is just to hide the data from the people or the devices who are in the path, like what is going on.
Okay, if you could make this very clear in the document, so then that when I read it, I understand that would be great.
Sure, I will add that. So DTLS is only required for privacy, not for trust.
Okay. Any more questions? Any comments? I'm seeing none. I'm wondering if Ben wants to repeat. I mean, did you catch what Ben mentioned?
Get the CodeEMD myself. So
Oh, okay, right. Okay. Okay, right. So let's move to the next presentation. Thanks, Mohit.
Thank you.
And we will move to this presentation, the IEP presentation.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So we can move to the next slide. We can see the outline. So basically, we are going to talk about the concept and different use cases, since this was an important issue when adopting the document. I'm going to try to clarify this aspect, and then we can check a bit the current state of the document and what are we trying to achieve here, and what we understand are the issues that we need to consider moving forward from this version. So we can please go to the next slide. So here's basically the main concept, the main idea of COAP-EAP. So we have EAP, that is a technology that allows us to perform authentication with different methods. This was one of the main reasons why we chose to develop this, because since in IoT we have a lot of devices with different characteristics, we have different types of networks. We may need to have also different ways of providing authentication to these devices. So we can do that with EAP. And since EAP needs an EAP lower layer, we chose to look at COAP to fulfill this role, and we saw it as a really good fit. So basically, the idea is that we have a device that tries to join a security domain, and that is managed by a controller, and it can have the bootstrapping service exposed, as we can see here in the image. By means of the COAP-EAP exchange with the controller, then this EAP exchange that is contained within COAP goes optionally to a external AAA server, which is in charge of choosing the authentication method. And then when the process finishes, if we can go to the next slide. Then when the EAP method returns, the EAP exchange finishes with an EAP success, we can consider that the IoT device has successfully joined the security domain. It also has established a security association. As a consequence also of the EAP authentication, the controller and the IoT device share key material, which enables this security association. After that, we can act as a trustworthy entity in the security domain. If we can please move to the next slide. So here I'm trying to go over several use cases. The most important in this case is how does COAP-EAP fits in ACE. So we understand that COAP-EAP can be used to perform the process, the client registration, and derive key material to establish different security associations. And once the IoT device belongs to the security domain of the controller, in this case could be co-located with the authorization server, it can act as a client within the ACE framework, maybe to query another IoT device that is, in this case, is a resource server. So by means of the authentication and the establishment of the security association with the controller, we could ask for a token and go on with the ACE framework process. If we go to the next slide, please. So another use case that are typically seen along with EAP is for network access, just to being able to authenticate to allow traffic through a network entity that is in charge of allowing the traffic through to the internet or doing packet forwarding. Another use case would be to provide generically a service authentication, in the sense that maybe the the previous case for network access is done within an infrastructure that is not managed by the organization of the device. And if they have an agreement, we can authenticate and get access to the network and the internet. But maybe we have also another services that need authentication. So we could also leverage COAP-EAP for this objective. If we go, please, to the next slide. In this context, this can be done in different ways. So we can have a scenario where we have a multi-domain case where I'm trying to join a security domain that is not from my organization, and through the use of AAA infrastructures, different devices from different domains can join under the controller domain and act as trustworthy entities and exchange information through the controller in this case. We also have a case where we have a single domain and using a AAA infrastructure where, for instance, we have an organization that has several buildings or different campuses or whatever. Everything is managed under a single organization, but we might be able to give some flexibility by using this AAA infrastructure. And lastly, we have a use case where we have a single domain and we are not using a AAA infrastructure. In this case, we can co-locate the IEP server within the controller and centralize, in this case, all the credentials and operate seamlessly. So in any of these cases, for the IoT device, it is transparent to this device how it is done. So we think this is also another of the advantages of using this COAP-EAP schema. So if we go to the next slide, please. Here's actually the current flow of operation of COAP-EAP. How it works currently is we have the first message that it is a trigger message that is actually optional. If the controller knows already about the device, it can already start with a second exchange. That is the IEP request and response identity. With this information, the IEP method starts. Depending on the IEP method, we can have more flights or less. That's one of the characteristics. It all depends in this case from the IEP method. And lastly, we have the IEP success and the acknowledgement of this message. That in this case, we are protecting with OSCOR, Security Association. Nonetheless, even though we choose to use OSCOR for securing this specific service, we are able also, with the key material that we derive from the IEP authentication, to establish further security associations if they are needed for other services. For instance, we could establish a DTLS connection or any other security association that we should establish if needed. Well, in this case, we are assuming that we're using several characteristics of COAP that are out of our control in some cases. That's part of the discussion in the next slide. If we can move forward, please. So in this design, we put a new option that is a second option to provide order delivery for the messages of IEP. But if we are able to influence in some way the COAP engine, if we are able to choose the tokens and the messages ID, then we could do some optimizations. One of the optimizations would be to choose an empty token to save bytes over the link. In this case, this will be possible based on the fact that we are assuming that this initial phase, the bootstrapping phase, is done before any other transaction. So we could do that. We will not have anything else in parallel. We we could, in this case, also not use the second option if we can use the message ID in a piggyback exchange, and we do not have any other parallel transactions to assure the order in which the messages are exchanged. In any case, being an IEP exchange, it is already assumed to be in lockstep. So we should not have any issues if we can proceed with this kind of optimizations, if we are assuming that we have a COAP engine that we can influence in some way. In any case, the initial design is done assuming that we don't have any control over the COAP engine. I think that's all for now. If you have any questions.
Christian?
Well, I gotta admit, I haven't read the draft yet, but that kind of control is something that's usually recommended in the sense that you can make those recommendations to implementations so that they can be more efficient, but they can't expect other implementations to make the same optimizations. So it's more of a quality of implementation thing than a thing that a specification building on COAP would usually prescribe.
Okay, so we should go. You are saying we should go with the assumption that we cannot influence the COAP engine, and we should do it independently of that, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
So I can see on the chat a comment from Mohit. So I'm going to read it. Can we not have bullets in abstract? The IANA section is incorrect. It should request IANA to assign a value for COAP as a lower layer in the IEP registry. Have not read the latest version of the draft, but plan to send my review in the near or far future. It would be good to investigate if some optimization can be achieved by tighter integration between COAP and IEP. For example, relationship between COAP message ID and IEP request response ID.
Thank you, Mohit. Yes, these are also part of the optimizations that we also have in mind. But as you say, we should do some more research in this sense, because we may use, as you say, the message ID if we have some control over them and they are monotonically increased. Then we could, in some sense, substitute these the values for the IEP request and response ID, the sequence numbers in the IEP message could be also integrated with the COAP value. So thank you very much, Mohit, for this point. That is something that we looked for, but we actually didn't define it yet. But thank you. We will look for that to optimize even further the reduction of bytes sent over the network. Thank you.
So maybe a clarification question. If you want to optimize those two, which is the protocol you are going to left unchanged?
Yeah, so
COAP or IEP?
The thing is that I think COAP should not be changed. We should be able to leverage the numbers in COAP or create some sort of adaptation in the COAP application to send to the IEP state machine the values that it is expecting. So I think we should try to avoid modifying the IEP state machine as much as possible to keep it standard, But if on the COAP application we can generate some kind of state to feed the IEP state machine what it needs, I think that would be good.
Yeah. So I think Moit said he had something to the chat. I am guessing that you can't easily change control either of the implementations. What is unclear to me is whether the implementation means the state machine or anything, because I mean what is unclear to me is that if we cannot change anything, then we should not look further for the compression.
Yeah, that's why I asked if we should look at the possibility of influencing over the COAP engine. So if we can choose our token, and we can choose also to monotonically increase the message ID once the first is chosen, then we can do all these optimizations fairly easily. I think we can also do them with a little bit more of experimentation and burdening the COAP application, so to speak. So we would need to add all this logic in charge of adapting what is getting from the COAP layer to goes and what it goes to the IEP layer, to the IEP state machine. The COAP application should be in charge of managing all this complexity. And I think it might be interesting to look for if that is possible, and how much can we achieve giving this intelligence to the COAP application. But I think it's worth exploring at least.
Yeah, Carsten?
I think the main reason to use COAP is that this is a protocol that has been implemented, and if you make demands on the COAP implementation that are not usually met by COAP implementations, then you don't win. But what you actually can do is use properties of COAP. So, for instance, you know that there is some detection of duplicate messages and so on. And you can use these properties as opposed to trying to influence the actual header fields and giving them different meaning. That's not going to work very well.
Okay, so yeah, we should look for the inherent characteristics of COAP without any demands over the COAP engine, and try to do the modifications or optimizations, assuming that we are getting a standard COAP and we don't have any knowledge of what are we going to get in terms of token or message ID order, randomization, etc. Okay, thank you.
Rafael?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So this is Rafa from University of Murcia. I'm co-authoring this idea as well. So regarding your questions, obviously the main reason of using the sequence number option is because if you check the flow of for exchanges, the IEP packets, we need to keep that sequence. So then we thought, okay, let's include this this option. So we can assume that COAP as a protocol can use any message ID it wants, or token value, whatever. So we abstract our application from the implementation. So, and that's why we included that, because we wanted to, if you check the flow, as I said, then you need this log step protocol, then you need one message and then wait for that sequence number. When you send a sequence number, you wait for the number back in the answer. Then we also thought, okay, if there is any way to get rid of the sequence number option, if you are using some kind of mix of message ID or token values, That's our main question. So if we can do that, as Dan mentioned, if we can from an application part to say to the COAP engine, okay, I would like to set or this message ID or this token value. We can get rid of the sequence number? That was our question. That is the question is in the slide. But at the beginning, just in case, we included the sequence number. That's we have a requirement, and the requirement is there thanks to the sequence number option. So, but we have an open question. If okay, let's see if we can, or let's discuss if we can get rid of that option. That was that was a question. Thank you.
Ben?
So I'm not 100% confident I interpreted the question correctly. I just wanted to note that the EAP state machine is pretty sensitive or finicky, and so even slight modifications to the EAP state machine can cause security problems. We actually came kind of close to publishing a document for EAP TLS with TLS 1.3 that had a broken state machine. So I would be very hesitant about any changes to the EAP state machine.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, that's what I said. Why I said that I would like to keep the EAP machine, EAP state machine out of the modifications. And if we are trying to do is to optimize the bytes sent of the network, and we are going to send to reuse or do a mapping between the message ID that is sent in COAP and the message and the sequence ID that we need to send to the EAP state machine for that EAP message that is being in flight. That burden should fall into the COAP application. So if we are able to do that without altering the state machine, I think it would be worth exploring. But I agree with you that we should try to avoid modifying anything about the EAP state machine. Thank you.
Rafa?
Yes, regarding Ben's question, in my point of view, there is no need to change any EAP state machine. I mean, the EAP standard, it's clear about the requirements that we need to implement in a EAP lower layer, and in this case, COAP is acting as EAP lower layer. So I wouldn't go for any kind of optimization looking at the EAP state machine. The EAP state machine is there, it's standardized, we have the implementation, is already well known and it's working, and it requires something from the EAP lower layer. And one of the things is, and that's why we have the sequence number option. So in that sense, regarding Ben's concern, I'd say there is no need at all to change anything in EAP state machine. I wouldn't go that way, of course. What we are designing is the EAP lower layer. So the EAP lower layer has a role, is to transport EAP following the requirements that are defined in the EAP standard, in the RFC. Then let's go that way.
Yeah. So if we look at the architecture, you have the COAP layer and you have the heap layer. Those we don't really want to change them much, but you might have a compression layer in between that might take when it receives packet, it might take some parameters from the COAP and generate those, expand those to the heap, so that when the uncompressed packet hits the software, it doesn't change at all. Is that how it's going to be architectured?
Yeah, I think that's the idea.
Okay.
So for Rafa, I think he wants to answer.
I will talk later. Go ahead.
Okay. So yeah, I think that's the idea. So if we can create a state in the COAP application, such as it is able to map the COAP message ID and generate for the APE state machine the content it is expecting, and make sure that it will not cause any alteration. That will be the idea. Yes, Daniel. To do this little compression part inside the COAP application, if at all possible. Yes.
Okay, so just one comment. If we look at compression, there is something that is called chic. So
yes.
it might at some. So you're aware of that?
Yes. This is also another one of our places where we are looking at to optimize COAP-EAP further, even maybe to another use cases. We actually tried this COAP-EAP on LP1 networks, and it seems to work without any compression. If we have the chic compression, we might have a very interesting solution to take EAP even further.
Okay, good. So we can also think of splitting the work. I mean, uncompressed, and then not everything needs to be in the same document. So just to let you know. So thank you very much for this presentation.
Thank you.
I'm just checking. We have no additional questions, comments. I'm checking in the chat. I don't see much. So I propose we go to the PubSub profile with Signem.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, perfectly.
Okay, this is just a quick update. This profile was proposed by Francesco Palombini, and I was invited to add information about the MQTT case. So before we push a new update on this document, I decided to bring a few points to the working group to help us decide. So we restructured the document to explain both COAP and MQTT solutions. The MQTT solution is very similar to the COAP case. The main difference is that in the MQTT for the MQTT clients, we don't separate the publisher-subscriber role that much. We assume that each client can have both type of responsibilities. And we also authorize the subscriber clients, which will become a little bit more clear in the next slides. The things that we would need to do is a bit more clarification on the scope parameter, which is at the moment described as strings, and it should acknowledge that it's AIF as well, especially for MQTT, which expects that format in the scope, and then resolve the discussion points, which I will bring in the next slide. So one of the things that Francesca and I were discussing was the architecture. The current architecture assumes there are two AS entities, AS1 and AS2, which is the AS2 is separated to do a joint functionality of both AS and a key distribution center. The way that the AS1 works, it gives tokens out for publisher to be able to publish topics to broker. And AS2 basically creates the security context for publishers and subscribers to get the keys to protect the messages, basically, published to topics. So the way that it is described, the main advantage is that the subscriber doesn't need to get another token to authorize to the broker, as long as it can get keys from the AS2. And then it can do it in one shot. It just can do authorize and join in one shot. The main disadvantage is that AS1 and AS2 need to agree on policies. They should have synchronized policies. And when they are distinct like this, it's not very clear how that synchronization is achieved. The proposed change is basically treating AS as a single AS if the application desires it, it can be divided into AS1 and AS2, and it's not expected by default, but as desired, how to synchronize those ASs. The KDC gets a separate role and a broker, and they both act as if they are resource servers, where broker is the resource server for the topics where the publish subscribe goes for, and the KDC is the resource server for the keys to protect those messages for the topics. So it can provide a more simpler explanation of how things could be set up in terms of, and it also makes things a little bit easier for publish subscriber clients both being authorized against the broker. But in that case, the subscriber needs to get a token and then approach the KDC to get the keys. It cannot do it's one shot. So that can be considered as a cone. The tokens that they receive from the AS can be multiple audience and can be used towards KDC and broker, or we might think of other structures if, assigning multiple tokens and etc. if the work group desires it. Next slide. So this issue actually has been discussed in the working group list. It was brought up by me, and I also noticed that Jim brought it up earlier in his review of the text. So the point that he also mentioned was that AS1 and AS2 are independent appliers of access control logic, and they should be coordinated. And the counterpoint, which was raised by Francesca, was that they do have separated functions, and it's up to the application to decide how to coordinate them. And then when Jim raised, what happens when a token has been revoked in one, how does that get synchronized? Again, the counterpoint was that the revocation is a working group level solution. I guess the one thing that we would like to have clarification on is whether AS coordination or AS policy synchronization is an application-specific problem or a problem that needs to be resolved in the document, in this document. So that's one question. And when discussing with Francesca, we are fine with either, but we need to have a clear decision on this. Next slide. And the second discussion point is about handling multiple group joinings. So the way that the PubSub uses the group com is that the topic names are used as group names. And this is slightly different in MQTT case when the topics are topic filters. And the way that MQTT organizes the topic trees is that it is a topic tree, and in the KDC, the different sections of this tree might be keyed differently. So if this is not transparent to the client, and I will describe in the slide the case when it is not transparent to the client, is that the client might be asking for a topic filter, and it might find itself in two cases. The first case, its topic filter is a subset of that keyed section, so it gains access to keys that kind of apply to a larger set. This is not an issue because we authorize both publishers and subscribers at the broker level, so they would not be able to ever get publish or subscribe permissions at the broker to gain access to any of those messages anyway. So this is kind of a handled case, but it is just showing why we need subscriber authorization at the broker for MQTT case. The second option, the second case that the client can find itself is that its topic request spans multiple groups. And that's kind of something that is not inherently handled at the moment, being able to join multiple groups in one shot. And there might be solutions thought around it, but this needs a bit of more clarification. So the first question would be, would the client be expected to know how topics are keyed or groups are created at the KDC? If not, then how do we handle multiple group subscriptions? That's it. And once these discussion points are resolved, we would be good to move forward and submit another version.
Okay, so you're waiting for that Signam has been raising. I'm wondering if anyone has any thoughts on this. So does anyone, so I understand anyone, there is not anyone disagreeing with that. Do we have anyone strongly agreeing with that or agreeing? Well, so I think we're gonna wait for the next version, and well, at least
so in the next version,
the architecture look a little bit more simpler.
Okay. So in the next version, I'm going to move to the proposed new version then.
Yeah, that's how I see the things.
Yeah, if anybody has comments, if they could post it in the list as well, because it is a deviation from the current draft significantly. So
I don't. I'm just wondering. I'm a little bit unsure about the second issue. So I'm just wondering if folks in GroupCom or have any thoughts on that. What is unclear to me is that if it's GroupCom communications or the specification of the AIF.
no, it is more an issue
context.
of whether I have the right tools to work around this. And one can say that the way that the groups are created
Marco,
and how
go.
each. Sorry, can you hear me?
We didn't hear you very well.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, I think the first issue is that the topic filters might suggest multiple groups, which the client may not be aware of. Which groups do they correspond to, basically? So it's more about handling multiple groups and joining multiple groups with a single topic filter. And this is only an MQTT issue. I'm not too sure how COAP is trying to get permission for multiple resources. But in the MQTT case, you can refer to multiple resources by using these wildcards. If these are grouped in any way at the KDC differently, that means different keys might be attached to different resources, which the client may not be aware of and must be receiving. So okay, I am yes, that is true. That is true. The you know, if the client gets access to those topics by another channel than the broker, they can read it. That is true. But this is again an issue of how things are grouped and how they are keyed, and whether client requests need to be exact versus a subset or superset. I guess we can say we are very strict and you have to exactly have the rights for the group, and this is how the groups are managed. I guess we can solve this at the application layer and not have any flexibility. And if that's the suggestion by the group, I would follow it. You know, there is a clear application-specific requirement of how topics are grouped, and you have to get the exact group membership to be able to read and write to any part of that those resources. Basically, we can clarify that. It's just that it is a little bit more strict than how we do things in MQTT TLS profile.
Marco, do you want to add something?
Yeah, mostly a question at the beginning. I suppose the answer is no, but just to be sure, does this require any adaptation change in the ASCII group com document? Because this is an application profile of that one, right?
Yeah, no, that's what I am trying to avoid by using the existing APIs provided by the group com. I'm just trying to figure out what is the best way to address this, either by being too strict at the application and making the clients request exact groups with those exact topic filters, so there's no asking for a subset of a group or a superset of a group, or multiple groups. Or if we are being flexible, then I'm thinking about how to provide that flexibility without affecting security, or by asking joining multiple groups using the existing group com features.
Right. Hopefully a feedback about that. Key group common score works in a slightly different way, I suppose easier than what you're facing now, because the idea is to join one group at a time, but we are talking about security groups there. So the moment you join it, you get the key material for that group and that security group only, right? So even if a token can grant you access to multiple groups, you do the join one security group at a time. And again, the key material is exclusive for that security group. I guess the coupling you're talking about within security groups and other, I would say, application level groups like topics, that's something that we've been doing in core, by the way, in a way that we define as separate things, security groups and application groups, and you can have a one-to-many or many-to-many mapping. So not sure if it helps, just wanted to raise it. You may want to look at that approach used there, and possibly can be useful to you if you think of application groups as your topics.
I think that looks like a promising approach to do as well. Having a security group and and then you said one-to-many mapping, right? So
essentially, you may have the case where multiple application groups use a same security group, which would mean you get one bunch of keys that you will use in any of those application groups. And this is the easy, safe case. The other way around is more tricky when you have one application group using one of possible many security groups. And if you do that, you may have some reasons for that we documented. It's a bit more tricky. You need to be careful and know what you're doing. But both directions are possible in principle, depending on your use case in the end. I'm not sure if we lost Sigdem.
Yeah, that's what I'm checking.
can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Now
we can hear you. Yeah.
Sorry, I just had to reconnect. It's but I could hear you all that time. I think it is a promising way to look at it and see whether conceptually security groups and application groups can be separated, and it serves the different purposes that the MQTT clients are trying to protect the messages when they are submitting to multiple topics, for instance, where are subscribing to multiple topics. Yes, thank you very much for that link, and I'll look, and that could be very helpful.
I'm just pasting the link to the document in the chat, by the way.
Yes, thank you very much.
Welcome.
Okay. So let's move to the next presentation. So for all those three drafts that have been proposed, I see that the CMPv2 is pretty close to be ready. So maybe we can plan that for the next interim meetings. For the other two, I see that we may go for through more updates. So yeah, for the next interim meeting, I'd like that we can continue that conversation on the progress. So now, Marco, you want to start with the OSCOR profile or the key group com?
OSCOR profile is not my document.
Oh. So the key group com, is that yours?
That's mine. Oh, you meant the group OSCOR profile before.
Yeah, sure.
That's possibly for later. Key group com, I guess, is the next to take.
Okay.
Thank you, Daniel. Right. Hello, everyone. This is an update of the ACE key group com document, of which, by the way, the pub/sub document presented before is one of the application profiles. Next slide, please. So yeah, just to recap, I guess you've seen that many times, but the idea is to have one KDC deployed that can be accessed in principle as a resource server, bearing the ownership of an issued access token for a client with the intent to issue the request to join a group of some kind, depends on the application profile specifically defining that, and retrieving in the joining response the key material that has to be used once a group member. And then the particular details on the exact key material, its encoding, how it's used with what security protocol, that's up to the particular application profile to be defined for this document. And here, the biggest thing defined is, in fact, the API for joining the group and getting the key material upon joining, but several more operations are defined as exported by the KDC, including renewal of key material. Next slide, please. Yeah, there have been a lot of updates actually in this version, considering feedback already from the November meeting and discussions in 2 of the past ACE interim. So most was about closing the raised open points. First bunch of points here is about essentially editorial or slightly more than editorial changes, and especially refactoring and renumbering of all the long list of requirements that you have in the appendix of the document. The first non-editorial thing is the last point here that was discussed some of the interim. Following some comments, we had found a possible reason why a group member can observe its own dedicated personal resource at the KDC. It has the advantage at the moment, for whatever reason that node is evicted from the group, it just automatically, because of the way Observe work, get a notification of being evicted. So it's just a convenient way for the KDC to inform of the happened eviction. And so far so good. That's what's actually defined. And following some recommendation from the group, we've also included some totally non-prescriptive text, just as an under case recommendation of, oh, by the way, if you want to avoid multiple notifications telling you almost the same thing from different resources you're possibly observing at the KDC, you may want to use together observation and the no response feature of COAP. But since we know that there's not much known support of observe and no response used together, this is just included there as a free suggestion with no prescriptive intention at all. Building on the feedback we got, at least. Okay, next slide, please. Right, this eventually required a bit more of work, so we agreed pretty quickly on extending this parameter that is included in 2 possible requests, in the actual joining request to enter the group, or later on as a group member to retrieve public keys of other group members from the KDC. So this parameter is essentially telling the KDC, I want the public keys of other groups, and it allows you to specify some kind of filtering, because perhaps you don't want all of them. Now the filtering was already based on the roles of some of the group members that they have in the group and on their node identifiers. So far so good with the first one on the roles, but the second one on the IDs was in previous versions considered only in an inclusive way. So you could indicate the IDs of which you want the public keys back. And we discussed the possibility instead to help ourselves with inclusion of one additional Boolean flag at the beginning of this parameter, so that if the value is true, the IDs filter is used as it was used so far, inclusive, or if false, it's exclusive, like I want the public keys of other group members as long as it's not from this exact node IDs. Perhaps because I've been in the group for a long while, I already have the public keys of those IDs. I need the public keys of any other nodes that joined after my last public key retrieval. So basically, one more flag in that structure parameter. If true, same as always. If false, exclusive IDs filter. So as I said, this is used in two occasions. One is the join request. And well, that was pretty trivial to adapt because we were already saying all the way, you cannot really use any ID filtering at that point in time. So you can see the final inner array is empty. So for consistency with the overall format we are proposing, well, the flag is set to true. And that was pretty easy to address. Next slide, please. Yeah, when considering the other case, where the parameter is used in a fetch request to the sub-resource at the KDC to retrieve public keys of other group members, things started to become tricky as I was really writing this down, and eventually when I implemented that in the application profile for GroupoScore. And I nailed down these 5 cases, and they are sorted ironically in an increasing order of complexity. So in the first case, you want to filter only based on the roles. So the second array is empty, and for consistency, the Boolean is true, like in the case of the join request. The second case, you want to filter only by node identifiers. Okay, so the first inner array is empty. In the second one, you have node identifiers, and the Boolean is true. Say you want to filter in an exclusive way based on node identifiers, well, same as above, just the flag is false. It becomes tricky when you want to filter both on roles and node identifiers at the same time. I had to come up with something that I could code and run, so I ended up with this. If I specify both, and I indicate the flag as true, it means I'm fine with whatever matches with the roles I indicate and or any of the sender IDs, node IDs I indicate. But if I say false, it means that I want the public keys of any node with the roles I indicate, at the same time not having the node identifiers indicated in the final array. So first of all, I would like some feedback on, is this fine? Am I missing any case altogether? And on the other end, to reassure, yes, it's still possible to retrieve just all current public keys in the group talking to this resource, just sending a GET request rather than a fetch request.
So basically, you're asking us if there is not a use case you're not covering.
Yeah, first question is if I'm not forgetting any possible combination here that one may want to cover, and especially the interpretation I've honestly had to come up at some point is correct for the output I produce indicating true or false in the flag when both filters are used.
Okay, because I had the same question for you.
Well, that's one possible interpretation, totally arbitrary from my side. I believe it makes sense, but of course, other interpretations might be better.
Yeah, I would say I'm sure Carsten has something to say with that, because it's a common problem, I guess.
I apologize, I was distracted.
Well, we have to take a pen and to see that maybe in more details, Marco, I suggest.
It's possibly something to some advanced final review.
Yeah, but there is a recording, so I'll look at it later.
Right. And again, it's just easy to get all keys from this resource just sending a GET request. The problem is when you use fetch, because you do want to do some filtering.
Yeah, I think we need a pen and some time to look at all those combinations. So it's good to have more homework for the working group.
Yeah. Okay. Next slide, please. Right. This was also another thing discussed at the interim, and we had an agreement also to address this. Most likely, we consider a case where the keys in the group are practically coded as COSI keys. But in general, we are admitting possible different encodings that will have to be signaled properly, of course. The nice thing of COSI keys is that they embed as an inner parameter the node identifier of the group, which in fact we are using if we use exactly COSI keys. Since we are open for other formats, one day someone may want to use a different key encoding that does not provide internally a parameter, an element that can be used right away to encode the node identifier. And in that case, though, the node identifier is an information still to be provided to the joining node somehow. So to handle this case where the used coding for the keys does not allow to specify the node identifier, we have defined a separate, floating parameter to be included separately in the joining response. It's a structured parameter. It's an array with as many elements as the public keys provided in the joining response. So it's paired with each respective public key in the same position of the public key arrays, and it specifies the node identifier of the group member associated to that public key. So I'm not sure how soon anyone will actually need to use this, but at least it is available.
So there is a comment in the chat. I can read it. It's from Ben. I think I would want some time to ponder over it before agreeing that we can always use the COSI key ID to hold the node ID of the associated group member.
Okay, so basically it would be good and useful to use this new parameter even in case COSI keys are used, if I understand correctly.
I mean, it's more robust to do that. I guess part of my experience is that COSI is sort of a framework more than a protocol. And so there's not a clear definition of what goes in the key ID field or even who assigns it. So it may well be that us as an application using COSI can sort of assert that we want to use the key ID field in this way, but I would want to think about it before being confident that that's okay.
Sure. And yeah, I think this particular point is left to the application profiles. And for the group of score case, it's in fact the group manager in charge that generates the node sender ID and then includes them in the public fields when delivering the public keys or COSI keys.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Next slide, please.
So do we conclude on that, or? I mean,
I think we had discussed already that having this parameter was useful anyway to accommodate any possible future encoding of public keys really not admitting doing this at all. And of course, it's an optional parameter that you're not going to use if you don't really need it, but at least it's available.
Okay. Okay.
Right. This was another thing discussed at an interim. Was raised accidentally when talking of a small thing like error codes returned from a particular handler at the KDC. So it was easy to agree on returning for 00 in the particular case of, well, the payload is just not as expected, it's just a malform request compared to the expectation. When we started to discuss about a situation where it seemed good to return 503, well, 503% was good, but I think Karsten also added it can also mean anything. So you may want to add something more than just the error code to clarify what actually happens. And the suggestion was to look at the problem details document in core. Now I started that and tried to find the balance between that proposal and what has already been doing in ACE, looking especially at the errors that the authorization server can return. That essentially can indicate an integer indicating an error type, and then an optional text string to possibly give more explanations. And that developed into producing a list of possible error types that I would say already apply in general in this key group com document, even before thinking of any specific application profile. And I could think of this 7 error types summarized here. Fortunately, we are already defining a content format here. Application is groupcom plus CBOR that we are using overall in the document and in the profiles. So essentially building on that, and for most of the error responses, it is actually possible very easily to return, and it's meaningful and feasible for most of them to return one of these integers, giving more information already to the client, and hopefully optionally also an additional text string with more details. So I think this is at least consistent with the original concern raised about this, and I just hope I didn't get carried away with this exercise, but it didn't end up being too difficult, and I think it serves well, but I'd like to hear from you, especially if there are objections.
Well, as you mentioned, since we have this ACE group com plus CBOR, we're not squatting any code point. So any other feedback?
Well, I had to define a new registry, of course, specifically for this error types, but yeah, it still fit within the same content format.
So I think we can move.
There's no feedback. Yeah. Thanks. And this is the last point that we discussed in both past interims, and it's the only open issue left on GitHub. Actually, I preferred really not to close it and come back to you today first. Just to recap, this is a broader thing, I believe, regarding ACE, but we kind of agree that it was fine enough to propose a solution in this particular document, and still it is possible to reuse. Basically, the KDC can be not only just KDC in the sense defined in this document, but also more broadly act as resource server to multiple resources that can be accessed by multiple applications or specific application profiles of this document. The client simply posts an access token at the KDC. It's opaque for the client, and in the token that the KDC can eventually access, scope is just a CBOR by string. And that can mean many different things, can have a format and the semantics that can really depend on the application or the application profile. Problem is that exactly at that point in time where the KDC receives the token, it has to know how to parse and interpret the CBOR by string encoding the scope. So it has to know kind of in advance or have a kind of hint of what semantics to consider to parse to parse scope. So that was also rediscussed at the past interim. And I remember in the November meeting when we started to think of a solution considering CBOR tags and or integer to indicate a scope semantics. We got an early feedback from Ben that it seemed correct to consider these kind of things more than others to have overall a cleaner way out. Possibly involving registrations, in fact. So this was the recap. Next slide, please. Which is essentially a revised version of the only point I had time to go through at the latest inter that seemed to be okay, at least for the attendees at the time. So the idea, of course, is to start from the original scope as the authorization server is supposed to produce, just encoded as a CBOR by string, but optionally the authorization server has the possibility in the access token to specify scope in an extended format. And I just highlighted now in the latest submitted version of the draft following feedback from Karsten that this is, pretty general. The applicability of this is not limited to this document. It can be just taken and reused in any other application or application profile of ACE. As I understood, especially from you, Daniel, that it's all in all appropriate to have this in this document as long as it's a very well recognizable section. And now it is in the document body. But the mechanics of the proposal are the same, and starting from the vanilla scope, as it should be without any of this, which means the green box. You consider also a register integer indicating the exact semantics to be used to parse scope, and that's the yellow box. Then you build a CBOR sequence, putting together the integer indicating the semantics and scope, and then you wrap the sequence into CBOR by string that you tag. Because unfortunately, at the end of the day, scope in the token has to be a CBOR by string. So the price for this is one single CBOR tag registered, just to say this is an extended format scope. And then you can register integers to indicate the semantics used to encode the scope. And that will solve the problem at the KDC when receiving the token, because other than simple cases where, one semantics only supported for one particular application, only the KDC can have an explicit hint or how to progress in processing, the green part, basically. So this should be aligned actually to what discussed at the last interim. And it's the only issue still open on GitHub. I couldn't read the chat all along, so.
So from Signum, this is definitely important for the PUB subdocument. How to parse the scope for COAP MQTT applications.
Okay, so I suppose they would mean for your document registering a particular integer corresponding to the semantics you have in mind.
Yes, I was, sorry, I just started.
Oops.
Should I have been more polite and raise my hand?
No. Go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to clarify that indeed we use AIF as well in MQTT to describe the scope, and this scope I think is very much important in the PUB subdocument as well when communicating the permissions to the KDC. So it's nice to see a generic way of doing this and communicating that the scope is coming in the AIF MQTT format.
And by the way, in a particular application profile like the PUB sub profile, you may want to indicate that your KDC, your authorization server is strongly recommended to use this just in case to avoid confusion or the KDC not knowing what to do later on, unless you know very well that that's the only kind of application your KDC is running anyway.
So who are we envisioning to actually register something in this semantics registry? I mean, the student is writing an application for doing something. Should they register semantics or?
Well, the profile ACE key group from OSCORE is registering an integer. There's already a provisional thing about this, yeah.
So this is kind of a specification required thing where we think this will be a relatively small number of specifications, or is it more likely that specific applications actually need to go ahead and do something here?
Yeah, it's intended to be pretty open for any possible application, not only application profiles of this document. That's why I initially thought of a totally separate document. Yeah. Probably the only tricky thing to handle here is avoiding squatting of semantics. I mean, we don't want the two identical semantics accidentally consume two code endpoints, while the second to arrive semantics can just realize, oh, I'm just the same as an old one. That's actually the integer I should use here.
Yeah.
So I tried turning on my microphone early. I don't know if that helps, Christian.
Yes.
But I mostly just wanted to clarify that sort of the actual explicit tag is kind of the key part here. And so I wanted to ask, are there any cases where you would want to use or be able to use this extended scope format without the explicit tag?
They'll require that you always know in advance that it is an extended scope format, right?
Right.
I can't think of any. I can't exclude it either. So that would save the tag on the wire, but it's probably overall harder to manage, right? Doesn't it take a risky route?
Seems like. Okay, thanks.
There is Christian in the queue.
From my understanding, couldn't if there is the risk of for the use of that tag, if there is the risk of colliding with something else, then that something else might already be sending up using arbitrary binary tags, right? I mean that then the tag is just decreasing the kind of making the heuristics better, but it's not giving something it's not adding a conceptual distinction, right? It's just making it more likely that a random scope used by a different application and misconfigured is interpreted as something like this.
Yeah, the tag is just telling you parse this as a sequence of two elements, which will tell you what this is exactly about.
But if there's any danger of the other party, being the AS or the RS, not having this, then then that other party might still be using some random format, which so it's still a heuristic, right?
It's probably related to the question from Ben. It would work if you know in advance it is always or it is never an extended format scope, which is probably harder to ensure. Okay, my interpretation that this is overall aligned with the original proposal and addressing the small open points that remain around it, and yeah, I heard it's especially useful also for another one of the profiles of this. Yeah, if there are no more comments or objections, I think I can actually close the issue.
Looks to me we have pretty much discussed that. We had pretty much discussion on those, so and I'm focused on your slides, but yeah, it seems to me that it's pretty much ready to be closed.
The mechanics is exactly the same from 1 month ago.
Yeah. Okay, so
Okay.
I mean, if we were really wrong, someone would have jumped in the queue. So let's move on.
Yes. Next slide, please. But I think we are done. Yeah, I think the document is overall in a pretty stable shape, also editorially. And my plan was to consider open points and more feedback from today, address them, and then consider possibly moving to a working group last call, or if there are no feedback from today, possibly considering a working group last call, because I don't have any open issues remaining from my side.
So just to be clear, I mean, you describe the current version.
Yes, this is the last submitted version. Yes, I left that issue still open just to be sure.
Okay, but you don't expect to have any change on that?
No, unless anything comes today. No.
Mm-hmm. So I am inclined. Yeah, I think we can start a working group last call. And I prefer to extend the working group last call than to delay starting the working group last call. So my plan is to start a working group last call next week, if anyone objects. No. Yeah, so I will do that. I don't know. I would have expected the group com OS score profile and this one being sent together. But that's maybe the next presentation, is it?
That's the next presentation. I can imagine you'd like at some point later on to ship them together.
Yeah.
That makes sense. During their working group lifetime, I believe this will be shifted a little bit. So the previous one will have to wait a bit for this. Okay. It's not this one, Daniel.
Oh.
It's ACE key group common score.
I was saying, oh my God, at 25. So that's the...
Yeah, but most are backup slides anyway.
Okay, so this one.
Case.
I'm clicking on the right one, this one.
Yes.
So it's not only me mixing them up.
You know, the draft that seems to be almost ready and 21 pages. Oh my God. Go on, Marco.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. This is an update of another of the application profiles of the previously presented draft, targeting group of score as security protocol. Next slide, please. Right, now you are familiar with the workflow. The different details are just that the client intends to join exactly an OSCORE group where communications are protected with group OSCORE. So in this case, the KDC is specifically the group manager used in group OSCORE and treating the related specific key material for group OSCORE. After getting the key material with the join response, once in the group, group score communication can happen. The scope of this document is limited only for this key provisioning and other operations at the group manager for the group members. It doesn't consider access control at resources at group members. It doesn't consider communication itself, because that's about group score. Next slide, please. Okay, the updates in these versions are mostly related to the updates in key group com that we saw before, and to the group score document in core that we also had before the last cutoff. So relatively easy things. We adapted the get pub key parameter semantics that we saw before, with the additional including excluded filtering based on node IDs. I also already implemented that extension in my implementation of the group manager. It works fine and helped me nailing down those 5 cases. Following what started in ACE-key-group-com with the new error types and so on, the error handling overall was also improved here, already using the error types defined in key-group-com that I presented before. There is one more error type that I had to introduce here, where I can start thinking in terms of group currently not active, which is something left for an administrator and defined in yet another document. But that was still a reason to register one more error type. There are additional error situations regarding the particular error type which is returned. That came up in this document rather than before. For instance, where a node tries to perform some operations where the group is in fact not active, or operations that don't make sense or are not allowed with the current role in the group. Or the unfortunate case where a new sender ID has to be issued, but the group is so full that the group manager is really no sender ID to issue at the moment. So all these conditions now are mapped into error responses and error types. Next slide, please. Yeah, and still an alignment with key-group-com, as I mentioned before when replying to Karsten. Yeah, this document has also its reasons to optionally use an explicit indication for the scope semantics, just in case the group manager is running in a KDC that overall is supporting also other services and other applications, and when receiving an access token, scope can be related to any of those, and that kind of hint would be helpful to disambiguate. Otherwise, it was mostly about editorial improvements around the points discussed in the previous presentation. Other aspects are related to recent updates in the group score document of core instead, where we have introduced the possibility for the group manager to do some recycling of the sender IDs of the group members, as long as that doesn't happen under the same group identifier. So before it was forbidden altogether, and the group manager described here was aligned with that. Now it is partially allowed under that limitation, and we have updated the behavior of the group manager here accordingly. Also, there was a revision of the group score document related to mechanisms and policies to enforce synchronization of sequence numbers among the group members, and we noticed that 2 of them were just moot or not really relevant. We removed them, meaning that they had to disappear also from this document where they were considered and they were coming up again with registered code points. So removing moot things. Next slide, please. Yeah, when revising this document, and again related to recent revisions to group score, I noted that we still have a redundancy here that we used to have in group score and that we removed. And this is related to the capabilities of algorithms and of key types in COSI following the corresponding IANA registries. basically in GroupoScore we have two data structures to protect the messages and to describe the security context, where we describe how the group works. So which algorithm it uses and the properties of that algorithm and of the keys that it uses. And there was an information, the capabilities of the key type, that was repeated twice. So it was just redundancy, and we removed that repetition wherever we could in GroupoScore. Okay. I didn't do that yet in this document, but I think it would be good to do that just as well. And it affects 3 points of these documents. The first 2 points belong to the preliminary exchange between the joining node and the group manager during the token post and response, where the joining node can get early hints on how the group works and especially the algorithms it uses. So there's a summary here. All content says how things are now, and you can see that in 2 different parameters of the data structure in question, the capabilities of the key type are overall repeated twice. So the proposal would be to remove the capabilities of the key type from the parameters, sign parameters and ECDH parameters during that phase. And you have exactly the similar problem later on in the joining response, where the key CBOR map containing the whole key material tells you what signature algorithm and what parameters for the key you should use in the group. And there you have, again, the capability of the key types repeated while unnecessary. So the proposal is to essentially shift to the new content column, where all the information would remain, of course, available, but no redundancy anymore, and it would be also much better aligned with the GroupoScore document, meaning it becomes easier, faster, and harder to make confusion about in this document when getting the material from the group manager and building the score context. But before doing so, of course, I wanted to check about better thoughts or objections.
So just to make sure, it's part of the profile to define what is the response from the AES.
Here it's from the group manager, which is the KDC.
Okay.
These are both responses from the KDC during different. Okay. And by the way, yes. So we are defining these details here. So this doesn't touch key group com at all. Doesn't touch any other profiles. It's really specific of GroupoScore, and I think you'd be other than killing the redundancy, you'd be also in alignment with what we did in the core document.
Okay, so while saying that it's usually better to remove redundancy, so I think you can move ahead.
Great, with pleasure. Okay, next slide, which should be the last one, I think. Next steps. It's mostly aligned with upcoming things that were discussed already this week. Again, in the GroupoScore document. Well, one is the one I've just mentioned, killing the redundancy on the repeated information on the key type capabilities. Last week, and again during the core meeting on Monday this week, we also discussed that we can do something even better, and admitting recycling also of group IDs other than of sender IDs. That has a number of advantages. We know how to do that in GroupoScore, that was discussed already. That requires a little bit of additional logic on the group manager itself, which would mean some more steps to take internally, not on the wire, for the group manager to make this possible and secure. So, of course, I would have to revise the parts where I describe what happens at the group manager right upon a new member joining, so that then this becomes practically available to do in the group, like intended for the GroupoScore document. And third, That will not happen exactly next week, but I'm pretty sure in the coming months. We got an early comment from Ben on the GrupoScore document, in fact, in the core mailing list, about a particular usage of keys we are doing in GrupoScore. So basically, identity keys are using for two possible reasons at the same time. One is signing, and one is running diffie-Hellman to derive further keys for a more efficient pairwise mode. And Ben's concern was about this actual double usage, about which you have to provide very solid proof of not breaking security. We are actually working on such a proof. Seems it's going good, and we should be able to come up with something in the coming couple of months. So they will solve everything with no need to touch this document at all about that. But just to be on the safe side, in any case, the alternative would be to not go for one same identity key used for both reasons, but to go for two different keys used, one for signing and one for diffie-Hellman. So that would mean storing two keys, but first of all, provisioning them. And I believe that additional provisioning of additional keys would have to happen in this document, in fact. So that would mean extending the join request response exchange to provide additional keys of which to prove possession of the corresponding private part. So I believe we will not need to do that, because I'm confident we can go definitely for option A, but just to not exclude anything at the moment. Not to mention that, as long as KeyGroupCom is not really stable, I mean, past working group plus call comments revision, because of what I changed there, I will have to change something here too. So that's also an answer to your previous question, that possibly this document will end up being ready for requesting publication 1 or 2 rounds after the previous one.
Okay.
Yeah.
But they are independent, are they?
Well, no, this one depends very much on the previous one, of course. This is a particular instance.
No, but on
one.
this, but I mean, the ACE GroupCom key, this one is can be moved without the profile.
If it's fine to you, yes.
Okay.
I think so. I was assuming you wanted to some extent move them seriously forward at the same time, but sure, if it's fine to you, that one lives of its own.
Okay. Well, we'll see. We'll start with the working group last call and see where we go. Yeah. So, thank you. So we have a lot of work.
Just to clarify, yeah, that's why also I believe a working group last call on this document is that we'll have to wait a bit so that things in the chain become stable.
Okay. Yeah, sure. So I think we're gonna. I mean, I think we are at the end of the session now. So we might not have time to do the other presentations, but I do see that we have quite a lot of work to do in the meantime of the next interim meeting. So I'd like to thank everyone for this very productive session, and I'm glad to see all this piece of work being moved forward. I'm wondering if anyone wants to say something to close the session. Maybe Logan or Ben, you want to add something?
Well, I think so.
Please go ahead.
But mostly I just want to say thanks everybody for the productive session, and thanks again to Logan for joining as working group chair. Keep up the good work.
Okay. Logan, do you want to say something?
Session at IETF 111 and also the interim meetings.
Okay, so I think we can adjourn the meeting. And thank you everyone for that session, and see you in a few weeks. Thank you. Bye-bye.